Hi guys, David here from Almost Daily Science. So today I want to start off with kind of a controversial take. And I'm looking at an article from phys.org and it says, moons are planets too. So we're going to find out what that could possibly mean, and it's going to touch on the question of whether or not Pluto is a planet. And more importantly, what I want to find out today is who gets to decide what a planet is anyway? And how is it that they decide the criteria for determining what's a planet, what's a moon, what's an asteroid, etc.? So the article dives right in asking what makes a planet a planet. The answer turns out to be rather contentious. The official definition of a planet is defined by the International Astronomical Union, or the IAU. So that's who decides that Pluto's not a planet. So let's just look about who they are. I'm looking at their website. It says this was founded in 1919. Its mission is to promote and safeguard the science of astronomy in all its aspects, including research, communication, education, and development through international cooperation. So basically, its individual members are professional astronomers from all over the world at the PhD level and beyond. That sounds impressive. The total membership is 12,148. My guess is that if it's anything like other scientific societies, what it has is kind of a large membership, but then it will have committees. It'll have subcommittees that people can join and volunteer in that organize symposia, which are organized collectives of presentations. And then, so it says that there are symposia, focus meetings, individual business and scientific meetings of divisions, commissions, and working groups and offices. So what's most likely the case is there's some committee within the International Astronomical Union that gets together. Maybe there's 20 people in a room or something like that. And they kind of, at a committee level, decide on things like what's the definition of a planet. So in other words, it's a committee-driven thing. It's not necessarily science. And I actually think this is a super interesting point that touches on a lot of things other than just what's a planet and what's not a planet, and maybe that are more important than that. So there's a logical fallacy called appeal to authority. And with appeal to authority, it's considered a logical fallacy because it's kind of a conversation ender. Let's say you're having a debate with someone, you're looking at data, and you're trying to figure out what really is the most logical conclusion from data. If that other person at some point stops talking about the data and just starts talking about, I went to Princeton or something like that, or I'm older than you, or, I'm more experienced than you, it's actually, they're moving away from actually doing logic, doing careful data analysis, and they're moving towards something else altogether, just kind of like a social one-upmanship. And I actually think that the difference between doing science and doing science by committee is kind of the same thing. Now, I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole, but I do think it touches on what we're going to talk about today, which is that the difference between a planet and not a planet may not actually be so much so a scientific designation as a convenient designation as thought of by certain members of the International Astronomical Union. Back to the article, it was stated that this newest definition in 2006 said that a planet must satisfy three conditions. It must orbit the sun, it must be in hydrostatic equilibrium, and it must have cleared its orbital neighborhood. So I don't think I need to talk much about the first one, but the second one, I had to look up what this means to be in hydrostatic equilibrium. Basically, what it means is that the shape of the object has to be symmetrical and ellipsoid, which is to say, essentially maybe spherical or at least ellipsoid, where any irregular surface features are consequent to a relatively thin solid crust. In other words, it kind of has to have, I think if you zoom out, right, it has to basically look like a more or less smooth ball. And any mountain ranges or anything like that have to be essentially within a small crust. And the third criteria is that it must have cleared its orbital neighborhood, which according to Wikipedia, it means that the celestial body has become gravitational dominant, such as there are no other bodies of comparable size other than its natural satellites or those under its gravitational influence. By this definition, there are just 8 planets in our solar system, most notably excluding Pluto. And this has made a lot of people mad, mostly because people don't like change. And I get that. I'm sympathetic to that. But apparently, as this article will go into at greater length and the accompanying paper, some of these people are astronomers and they have better reasons to be annoyed about this than just, they're just stodgy old people and they just don't like to think about things differently than they used to. So the full-length paper that we're looking at, which I've included a link below, is called Moons Are Planets: Scientific Usefulness Versus Cultural Teleology in the Taxonomy of Planetary Science. And this is by a number of astronomers and planetary experts across the world. And they say that we argue that taxonomical concept development, which is to say taxonomy is the process of basically categorizing things. Just like the most classical way to think about taxonomy is to think about animals being in different kingdoms and phylums and classes and families and genus and species, and how that all kind of fits together, and you can understand how animals are closely related to each other based on similarities that make it easier to work with specific and broad scientific concepts as they relate to these different categories. So they argue that taxonomical concept development is vital for planetary science, as in all branches of science, but its importance has been obscured by unique historical developments. The literature shows that the concept of planet, developed by scientists during the Copernican revolution, about 2 centuries later, the non-scientific public had just adopted heliocentrism, or this idea that everything goes around the sun rather than everything going around the earth. And it says that they were motivated to preserve elements of the old way of looking things, including teleology. And so they were saying this idea is that that things arise for some purpose rather than things arising from some mechanism. The idea is that, from astrology, we have planets that have specific personas and characteristics and are associated with major gods in the ancient pantheons. And so there's a sort of, it feels purposeful, right, when you think about it. Mars is coming. Mars is the, harbinger of war, rather than just, well, that's a planetary body. We've called it Mars because of historical reasons, but it's no different than, say, something else. And so this motivated development of a folk concept of planet that contradicted the scientific view. The folk taxonomy was based on what an object orbits, making satellites out to be non-planets and ignoring most asteroids. In other words, there was something about the public mind that was comfortable with the ideas and the logic of astrology, which included, among other things, this idea that there'd be kind of like a limited number of planets and they would be purposeful and associated with old concepts like old gods and pantheons. And what this article is arguing is that there's a much wider array of celestial bodies which actually could fit a Copernican definition of planets, and that this was considered to be unacceptable to the public. As we argue below, the folk taxonomy of our solar system, which sees planets as an orderly system of just a few culturally significant objects, reflected the values and cosmological theories of the non-scientific public during the early 1800s when it was developed. And possibly the implication is that the public today is perhaps more scientific than it was in the early 1800s, most likely the case. And so perhaps we can actually start bringing into alignment our scientific taxonomy of planets with our folk taxonomy of planets, instead of shoehorning our folk taxonomy onto our scientific understanding, which is the argument that this paper is making. Okay, so this next bit I think is really spicy, and and so it's actually talking about the scientific conference where it is that they voted on this. And it says, in a period of about 4 days, a group led primarily by the dynamicists, I'm not sure who they are, began meeting and wrote an alternative definition, then pushed it through to a vote. Apparently they believed this action was allowable because it seemed no different than what the IAU leadership had just done to them, surprising them with a proposal on the second day of the GA with no prior chance to analyze and assess it. Also, the executive committee, which should have known the extent to which the rules were being broken, did not step in to stop it, further believing in the legitimacy of those actions. And then this is a big deal. Only a little more than 400 members were still present to vote at the end of the gathering. Planetary scientists, especially planetary geoscientists, were deeply non-represented. partly because they are not members of either the IAU or its member organizations, partly because planetary scientists do not ordinarily attend the IAU meetings, as it is not a venue where much planetary geoscience takes place, and partly because the existence of a planet definition proposal was kept secret, so the community was not alerted to participate, and partly because active resolution crafting is not supposed to take place during this type of meeting, so they could have not known how important it would be to participate. The arguments from both sides during the meeting were heavily invested in how the public would respond to the definition, since planets are important in general culture. But we found no records or reports of any discussions addressing the issues that we present in this paper. Some argued that the public would not accept a definition that allowed more than a small number of planets. Others were concerned with creating a definition that represents the dynamicists and the geoscientists equally so as not to insult any part of the community. When the vote was taken, it again demonstrated a lack of the broad consensus to which the IAU aspires, since the votes were split approximately 2/3 for and 1/3 against, according to some witnesses, or a narrow majority according to others. This shows that it was not a level that could be considered consensus, and that resulted in the definition that they embraced that we talked about before, this three-part definition. While this purports to be an intentional classification by listing requirements for memberships, it's really what they call an extensional classification by listing all the members. The 8 planets are Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And what they did, apparently, is, the argument is that they decided that probably 8 planets is what the public would accept. And if they included Pluto, they would have to include several other planets because Pluto was too similar to those other planets. But they thought the public, the non-scientific public, just could not even handle the idea of more than, maybe 9 or 10 planets at most. And so they wrote a definition that would only include these 8 major planets. And they may have been right. I mean, come to think of it, if in 2006, if the news had come out that instead of Pluto not being a planet anymore, there were 15 planets or something along those lines, or 10, maybe the public would be even more angry. But I don't really think so, because I think people like finding out that there are more planets. That's kind of exciting, right? Instead, finding out that Pluto is not a planet, even though you were taught that in 3rd grade, darn it, is a completely different kind of feeling. The main conclusion of this paper is that the idea that these planets have to be few, monocentric, and orderly was not developed by scientists to cohere with any scientific theory. Instead, it originally developed in the 1800s as the public was basically just still thinking about planets as kind of the music of the spheres and how that fits with astrology, and Mars is in its 3rd house or something like that. And they just thought that the public would not be able to handle any other definition, so they kind of put things forward in kind of a nice buttoned-down manner. But they said, we believe that the scientific or the non-scientific culture is more advanced, that they're more scientifically literate, and that people are interested to know what really is the case about a topic. I don't know if that's true. I would like to think it is. I think we are probably, the average person is certainly more scientifically literate than probably in the 1800s, especially because average literacy rates are a lot higher, and we also have social media and stuff like that now, and we have people like you who are watching weird videos about astronomical taxonomy and leaving comments and engaging in the conversation and liking the video. Thanks so much. But I don't know for sure. So for the sake of time, I'm going back to the summary article, and just to answer the question is, so what makes a planet a planet? Based on their work, the team argues that the IAU definition is a poor one. The general public dislikes it because it excludes Pluto, but more importantly, many scientists ignore the definition and still refer to bodies such as Titan, Pluto, Ceres, and others as planets for good scientific reasons. What seems to be the most consistent defining factor is that of complex geology and geophysics. If we define planets by their geophysical qualities, then the Galilean moons are planets, as is Pluto, as is Pluto's moon, Charon, as is our own moon. Anything with a diameter larger than about 500 kilometers would be a planet, because that would give it a certain geophysical quality like we were talking about before. meaning that our solar system alone has more than 100 planets. So what do you think? Can you accept the idea that maybe our solar system has more than 100 planets, or do we need to just keep it down to, maybe 9 or 10 at most? Should Pluto be a planet again? And then the other question is, who gets to decide? Do you think the International Astronomical Union is the one that gets to decide, or how should we do this? Maybe we should put it to a vote. So maybe it'll be on the next ballot along with President and Congress and everything like that. Well, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and I hope you'll join me again soon in the future. Bye.